If we want lower cost education and more quality, then we do need to have school districts basically competing for students. And it's counter to the whole top-down approach. I believe that parents are the first line in education, then teachers, then local boards. State should be out of the picture.
Okay, so really local control is what you're really more in favor of.
That's what I'm all
I know
about.
there's some people in other parties that are running on platforms of actually wanting to take the state to take over the school system and actually do that. And yeah, I assume you'd be opposed to that.
Yeah, it's not working very well now, and we're almost there.
Okay.
So.
Okay. I want to switch it to energy independence.
Okay.
Illinois is a state that's very rich in natural resources. We have coal reserves. We have oil reserves. I found out actually a couple months ago. We have several nuclear power plants, more than most other states. We have a lot of corn, ethanol. We have a lot of soybean, biodiesel. We have wind farms up north here. So we have a lot of energy resources. What are your thoughts on ways to release some of that to be able to create more business opportunity for to harvesting these natural resources in the state, making us more energy independent as a state? And then I want to get your thoughts just in general on cap and trade at the federal level, because that again does have impact in the state of Illinois.
Yes, it does. Bad impact.
Okay.
But let me go back to the first part of your question. It ends up again that, amazingly, the free markets will bring down prices in energy. And certainly, I am not a fan of dependence on foreign oil. We have oil reserves all over the United States, up in Alaska, off the coast of California, throughout the Gulf, and I hear there's even reserves up in North Dakota in that area. So from a countrywide standpoint, there's plenty of oil reserves. Yes, the oil industry in southern Illinois has just been decimated by the wild roller coaster ride they've had because of the OPEC's control in the 80s and 90s. It's just a shame that they had to cap off wells, so we have production that's just not only idle, but it's no longer able to be reused. So I would like to see, again, let's get the government out of it. Let's let free enterprise take over. I am for more coal plants, more oil production in the state. I am not, however, for the government, the state of Illinois, subsidizing a clean coal plant.
Okay.
I think if it's going to be a viable energy source, it needs to be competitive. This is my problem with the wind farms. I'm not against wind energy. I'm not against solar energy.
Right.
But I know from studying them that they are not cost effective.
Okay.
They are only useful if they have government subsidy. There's whole industries set up telling people how they can get subsidies, what states are best for subsidies, and so on. So obviously, if left to their own devices, those industries would never fly. So I'm glad to see that we're using wind energy, only it's really costing us.
Sure.
So I'm not for subsidizing that.
Okay.
My feeling is that nuclear energy is our best energy. It's the cleanest energy, and it's the most reliable. For example, wind farms are the first to be shut off the grid when demand goes down. Nuclear energy is the last. Now, part of that is because it's harder to shut down a nuclear power plant than it is to throw a switch on a wind turbine, but still, it's clean compared to all the other, and it is reliable.
Well, I'd imagine that Byron, for example, which is up the road here from Sauk Valley, from Sterling-Dixon area, probably produces a little bit more energy than, say, a wind farm.
I would think.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you'd be for nuclear, you'd be for harvesting whatever we have that cannot be subsidized, essentially.
Yes, yes. Again, in order to keep the prices low, we need competition.
Well, let me talk a little bit more about cap and trade then. I want to get you to cap and trade, and I guess I want to ask you, get down to brass tacks, if you believe CO2 is actually a pollutant, or if it's just a natural byproduct of humans and animals and burning fossil fuels.
Well, that's very interesting because I have a scientific curiosity, and before I got so heavily into this election cycle's worth of politics, I've done a lot of research just because of my interest on the cycles of ice age and warming and so on. And we can look at a long-term period or a short-term period and we see the same thing, and that is that the environment does not stay steady. It ends up that climate change started, coincidentally, when climate began, when the Earth was formed. It's an amazing concept.
Yeah.
And we've had periods where there was no ice at the ice caps. We've had periods where the whole world was covered with ice. And I guarantee that in the future, no matter what people do, we're going to have similar periods again. It seems that the Ice Age ended 14,000 years ago, coinciding with the rise of civilization. And during that time, we've still seen fluctuations. We saw after the Ice Age ended, we plunged into another Ice Age several thousand years later that was short-lived. During the medieval times, we had a warming period where it's even warmer than it is now. And yet, if you look at the pictures of the founding fathers, you saw that they all wore heavy clothes because we had what was called the Little Ice Age, which lasted 500 years. So our challenge should be not trying to change the environment, not trying to change the climate, but instead we should be getting prepared for whatever it throws at us, whether it's going to be warming, cooling, or just more of the same.
So cap and trade, you're not for it?
That would be an effort to basically tear the economy completely apart, take everybody's money in the form of taxes, giving it to companies such as GE who are creating carbon markets and green technologies that cost more, again, taking away from the whole idea of free markets and implementing stricter controls on what you can and can't do. No, obviously, I am against cap and trade.
Okay, very good. Let's talk about state security for a second. Are you in favor of selling Thompson to the federal government and moving the Gitmo prisoners there?
That is not a simple question. That's a complex question.
Okay.
Because, first of all, I don't understand why we have an empty prison. Well, I do understand why we have an empty prison in the corner of the state.
Let's talk about that. Why do we have an empty prison in the corner of the state?
Well, somebody needed a political favor, wanted to have some jobs, and what better way than to fund the construction of a prison. And I'm happy for the jobs that went to building that prison, but it seemed to be a little misdirected when at the same time we're releasing prisoners all over the state. If you were going to move prisoners from Pontiac or Stateville up there, then you should have definitely said, this is what I'm going to do, and regardless of the political fallout, you should have then moved the prisoners.
So the state auditor general, I think it was in August of 2009, actually put a study saying that on average the prisons in Illinois are 32% over capacity. And I go back to my question I just asked. If that's true, why was Thompson empty?
Well, that's a good question, and there's a lot of theories about that. And I don't want to go too far down that road, but it is almost like it was tailor-made for what they're trying to do right now, doesn't it?
It's interesting. I have a feeling that it's more people are over capacity are getting more funding from the state, therefore they don't mind being over capacity. And poor Thompson stays idle because people are unwilling to give up their prisoners. Even though that, as you know, Governor Quinn did release a whole bunch of prisoners, which is getting a lot of backlash for because some of them are hardened criminals. And in fact, alleviating the overcapacity could have been done very easily by, as you mentioned, Statesville, Pontiac, or Joliet could move to Thompson.
Right.
But going back to moving the Gitmo detainees to Thompson, are you for or against it, and what are your thoughts?
Exactly, and that is the mitigating factor to actually having a cell. I mean, if we've got an empty prison, why wouldn't we want to sell it and get the revenues back? But in reality, the whole issue goes back to the Gitmo detainees. And I'm a person that questions things differently. I never just say, if somebody gives me an argument, I want to stop and say, well, is that really the basic assumption? One of the basic assumptions we have with the Gitmo detainees is that the federal government has said these people are so dangerous that the world will end if they're in your backyard. And it doesn't matter that in Stateville and in prisons all over the country, we have MS-15 people, we have Latin Kings, we have people who are murderers, probably would make the Gitmo detainees cower in their corners. And their organizations are just as dangerous, but we don't worry about that. I think this is a politically motivated argument. One thing we have to look at, and as a libertarian, we are very concerned with the rule of law as pertains to the Constitution and with individual rights. And in this case, we've got a class of people who we've let the government tell us are so dangerous that we can suspend habeas corpus, we can hold them without charges, and they're not U.S.